My name is Emily Carter, and if you had met me 10 years ago, you'd have called me the perfect wife. I had a bright smile, a warm laugh, and a devotion that I thought was uncheckable. I was 32, married for 9 years to a man I trusted with every part of my life, and living in a cozy home in the suburbs where every picture on the wall held a memory we had built together. On paper, our life looked perfect. Friends and family admired our marriage. People envied how smoothly it seemed to run. But the truth was far more complicated. For years, I had put my life on hold for him. I gave up promotions at work that required travel because he didn't want to move. I shelved hobbies I loved because he never showed interest. And I poured my energy into making our home a warm, welcoming sanctuary. I truly believed that love meant sacrifice, that happiness meant compromise, and that a strong marriage was about putting someone else first. I believed that until the night my world crumbled. It started like any other evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of spaghetti lingering from dinner, the TV murmuring in the background. He looked serious, which was unusual for him. I noticed his hands fidgeting with the coffee mug, a nervous habit he'd never had before. I had a sense something was off, but I dismissed it. Then he said the words that would haunt me forever. Emily. I never stopped loving my ex. I remember laughing at first because I thought he was joking. I thought it was a terrible attempt at some kind of dark humor. But then I saw his face and the laughter died in my throat. He was dead serious. He didn't cry. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look ashamed. He told me she had reached out, that they had been talking, and that being with her felt right. In that moment, I felt like I had been pulled under a wave that I couldn't escape. The air in the room thickened, my vision narrowed, and all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to make him stop, make him explain, make him remember everything we had shared. But the words I wanted didn't exist, and the life I thought I had was gone. He didn't need to pack. He didn't need to argue. Within days, he had moved out. And just like that, the man I had trusted with my heart, my home, and my dreams was gone, replaced in his own life by someone who had existed before me. The next few weeks were a blur. Friends reached out, some awkwardly, some not at all. People didn't know what to say to the woman who had been left for her husband's ex. Bills that I had never worried about suddenly became terrifying. The house felt too big, too silent, too empty. Every corner reminded me of him. Every photograph seemed to mock me. And worse, he seemed to move on effortlessly, sharing pictures of smiles and dinners and vacations on social media as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. But amid the heartbreak and the humiliation, something unexpected began to stir inside me. Beneath the pain, beneath the tears, I felt the faintest spark of resolve. Not revenge, not yet, but survival. I realized that my story didn't have to end with abandonment. I realized that I could either crumble under this betrayal or rise above it. I could either watch him live happily ever after while I suffered, or I could rewrite my own ending. That night, sitting alone in the dark, I made a silent promise to myself. I will not let this define me. I will not let this break me. I will take back my life, piece by piece, and I will become someone I am proud of, even if he never sees it. And that was the beginning of my journey. The journey of a woman who had been left behind, but who would eventually learn that losing someone who doesn't value you can sometimes be the best gift of all, a gift that gives you the chance to find yourself, to reclaim your power, and to build a life that no one could ever take away. The weeks after he left felt like I was living underwater. Everything was muffled, the voices of friends, the laughter of neighbors, even my own thoughts. I went through the motions. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I paid bills, but it was like someone had drained color from the world. Every corner of my home reminded me of him. His tie still hung in the closet. The coffee mug I'd given him for our anniversary sat on the counter, untouched. Even the scent of his cologne lingered in the bedroom like a cruel memory. I tried talking to friends, but most didn't know what to say. Some avoided me entirely, uncomfortable with the reality that my marriage had ended because my husband chose someone else, someone from his past. A few tried to offer advice, but I wasn't looking for advice. I wanted someone to tell me it wasn't true, that this was some bad dream I'd wake up from. But life wasn't going to give me that luxury dot, and then there was him. Oh, he didn't just leave quietly. He flaunted it. He posted smiling photos on social media, a weekend brunches, hiking trips, romantic dinners with her. Every time I scrolled past his updates, my chest would tighten. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to scream at the world for being so cruel. I wanted to hate him with every fiber of my being. And I did at first, but hate is exhausting. And I quickly realized that if I stayed in that state, I would vanish under it. I would become a ghost in my own life, consumed by the man who had already abandoned me. That night, sitting alone on the couch with the city lights flickering outside my window, I began to think differently. I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. What if this isn't the end of my life? What if this is the beginning of something else? I didn't have answers, but I had determination. I realized that while he had moved on, I still had myself and I still had choices. I had a career I had ignored, skills I had put on hold, and a life that didn't have to be defined by a man who didn't appreciate me. The first step was terrifying. I needed to stop looking at him, stop comparing myself, and stop feeling like my worth was tied to someone else's decision. The next day, I started small. I reorganized my home, getting rid of items that reminded me of him, his shirts, gifts he had given me, even pictures of the two of us together. It was painful, almost ritualistic, but it was necessary. Every item I removed felt like a tiny act of reclaiming my life. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. This was private, sacred work. I needed to prove to myself that I could live without him. I also started journaling. At first, it was just angry scribbles. How could he do this? Why her? Why me? But soon, the anger began to fade, replaced by reflection. What do I want for myself? What do I deserve? The writing became a mirror, showing me a version of myself I had ignored, the ambitious, capable, and independent Emily who had existed long before marriage. The hardest part was the silence. The nights were long, and memories flooded in waves. But slowly, in that silence, I discovered a strange kind of freedom. I wasn't defined by his choices anymore. I didn't have to play the role of the hurt, abandoned wife for the rest of my life. For the first time, I realized I could take the narrative back and start writing my own story. And so, I made another promise, this one stronger than before. I won't just survive, I will thrive. I will become a woman who doesn't need validation from anyone. I will turn this heartbreak into power. It felt impossible at the time, but I could feel the seed of something big planted inside me, the start of a transformation that would eventually change everything. Didn't know it yet, but this heartbreak was the beginning of my revenge, the kind that doesn't hurt others but builds me up stronger, richer and freer than I had ever been. And deep down, I felt a flicker of hope. One day, I wouldn't just live without him. I would flourish without him. For the first time in years, I realized I had a choice. Not a choice about him or his new life. He was gone, and that chapter had closed, but a choice about me. I could stay broken, bitter, and obsessed with what I had lost. Or I could start building a life that I loved. A life that belonged only to me. It wasn't easy. Every morning, I woke up with an ache in my chest, a hollow reminder of the love I had given freely, only to be discarded. Friends would casually ask how I was, and the truth, I don't know, felt impossible to explain. I had to find my strength somewhere deep inside, somewhere untouched by betrayal. And slowly, I discovered it. It was in the little things I had ignored for years. I started with myself. I hadn't realized how much I had neglected me, the hobbies, the dreams, the ambitions that had existed before my marriage. I enrolled in an online course I had always wanted to take but had dismissed as too impractical. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a way of saying to myself, I matter too. The first lesson I completed, the first skill I practiced, the first little achievement, it was electric. It reminded me that my worth was not tied to anyone else's approval. I also began to redefine my social life. I stopped attending events I had only gone to because he wanted me there. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with, those who reminded me of the parts of myself I had buried. I joined local groups and communities that aligned with my passions. And for the first time in years, I felt alive not in the shadow of someone else, but in my own light. Money had always been a safety net in our marriage, but now it became a symbol of freedom. I started managing my finances for myself, learning about budgeting, investments, and planning. Each small financial decision felt empowering, as if I was taking back control of a life that had been quietly slipping away from me. I realized that independence wasn't just emotional, it was practical. The more I learned, the stronger I felt. Even physically, I started to invest in myself. I walked more, ate healthier, and slowly began to reclaim my confidence. It wasn't about attracting anyone else. It was about feeling like me again. When I looked in the mirror, I started seeing a woman who was capable of standing alone. A woman who had been underestimated but not defeated. The hardest part of choosing myself, though, was letting go of the past. I had to stop thinking about him constantly, stop checking his social media, and stop imagining the life we could have had. I had to accept that the man I loved had made a choice, and that choice was not about me. It was about him. Once I stopped chasing explanations, the fog of pain began to lift. One night, as I sat at my desk writing down my goals, I felt a surge of clarity. I realized that the life I wanted wasn't something that would happen by chance. It would be deliberate. Every action, every decision, every small step mattered. I didn't just want to survive, I wanted to thrive. I wanted financial independence, emotional freedom, and a life that couldn't be shaken by anyone else's choices. I wasn't sure how I would get there, and that scared me. But for the first time in a long time, fear wasn't paralyzing, it was motivating. I began to map out a plan, skills to learn, investments to make, experiences to have, and people to surround myself with. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, it was about becoming so complete, so independent, that anyone who had left me would see what they had lost. That night, I made another promise to myself. I am not the woman he abandoned. I am my own person, and I will build a life that is entirely mine. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt hope, not the fleeting kind, but the kind that takes root and refuses to let go. And in that hope, I began to truly understand the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be mine. Every step I took from that moment on was a step toward freedom, power, and self-respect. Every small victory would remind me that I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. I chose myself, and that choice would become the foundation of everything I would achieve. Once I had made the decision to choose myself, the next step was terrifying. I had to act. Thinking about freedom and independence was empowering, but it was just words until I turned them into action. I knew that if I truly wanted to rebuild my life, I had to start making smart, deliberate choices that would set me apart from the version of me who had let love blind her. The first thing I did was return to my career. During my marriage, I had put my ambitions on hold for him. I had let his desires guide my decisions, believing that sacrifice was love. Now I realize that my skills, my intelligence, and my drive were the tools I needed to reclaim my life. I enrolled in an advanced certification course in digital marketing, a field I had always been fascinated by but had abandoned when our life became our life. Not mine. Those first few nights were grueling. I worked late into the night, balancing freelance projects and the online course, exhausted but determined. There were moments I doubted myself. Am I too old? Am I too late? Will I fail? But every time fear crept in, I reminded myself I was doing this for me, not for anyone else's approval. Each completed lesson, each successful project, each small victory became fuel. It was a quiet kind of triumph, but it felt monumental. I was proving to myself that I could still achieve greatness. Alongside my career, I began learning about money, something I had always ignored. My husband had managed most of our finances, and I had always assumed it was safe. But suddenly, I was faced with the reality that my financial independence was entirely my responsibility. I read every book I could find on personal finance, investments, and entrepreneurship. I opened investment accounts, researched stocks, and began saving with purpose. Every dollar I earned and invested became a statement. I control my life now. The first tangible payoff came when I launched a small freelance marketing business. I started with just a few clients, but my dedication, attention to detail, and drive quickly earned me a reputation. The work was challenging, but unlike before, I was doing it for myself. I didn't need validation from him or anyone else. I only needed to see myself grow. Slowly, my income increased, and with it came confidence. One day, while reviewing my first month of profits, I realized something powerful. For the first time in years, I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone to validate me, to make me feel secure, or to define my worth. My life, my success, my happiness, it was all mine. That realization hit me like a thunderclap. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it had started to transform into fuel. Fuel that would drive me to heights I hadn't dared imagine before. I also began to notice changes in how I felt emotionally. The fear, the sadness, and the self-doubt were still there in waves, but I was learning to ride them instead of being drowned by them. Each time I achieved a goal, no matter how small, I felt a surge of pride. Each financial milestone, each career achievement, each skill I mastered was a step toward reclaiming my life. Doubt it wasn't just about money or work, though it was about control. I realized that my independence was a weapon far more powerful than anger or revenge. It was a silent, unstoppable force that could change my entire future. I didn't want to hurt him or make him regret leaving me. I wanted to create a life so full, so rich, and so free that he could never touch a dot. And as I lay in bed those nights, exhausted but satisfied, I began to imagine the life I could build. A life where I didn't rely on anyone. A life where I traveled, explored, and pursued my dreams without hesitation. A life where I could wake up every morning excited to be myself. That was the first smart move, not just a career choice, or an investment, or a small business, but a mindset shift. A decision to act deliberately, to reclaim power, and to use heartbreak as a launch pad rather than a prison. Little did I know, that move would set the foundation for everything that was coming next. The wealth, the freedom, and the independence that would eventually become my ultimate revenge. By the time I reached the 6th month after he left, something inside me had shifted in a way I hadn't expected. I had started my freelance marketing business, I was taking online courses, and I was managing my finances with precision. But the most important change wasn't what I was doing, it was how I felt. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. Not a little bit completely. Money, which had always felt like a source of anxiety and limitation, became my tool for freedom. I had started with small investments in index funds, learning the basics of compound interest, stocks, and retirement accounts. At first, the numbers were confusing, the spreadsheets intimidating. But every time I learned something new, a spark of pride ignited. I realized that financial knowledge was power, and I had finally claimed it for myself. I also expanded my freelance business, taking on more clients, negotiating better rates, and learning the art of marketing myself effectively. Before, I had doubted my abilities, feeling like I wasn't worth more than the bare minimum. Now I was confident, capable, and unapologetic. Each new project I completed felt like a step away from the life I had lost and a step toward the life I was building. One day, I received an email from a major client asking if I could lead a marketing campaign for their startup. It was high stakes, high pressure, and high reward. Normally, I would have hesitated, doubted myself, or asked someone else's opinion. This time, I said yes immediately, and I delivered beyond expectations. The paycheck was significant, but the real reward was the knowledge that I could succeed without anyone holding my hand out as my income grew. So did my sense of independence. I no longer worried about rent, bills, or whether I had enough to make it through the month. I could pay for my own apartment, my own vacations, and even indulge in small luxuries without guilt. It was intoxicating, not because of the money itself, but because it represented freedom. For the first time, I didn't feel tethered to anyone. I was free, and that freedom bled into every part of my life. I started traveling alone, something I had always wanted to do but never dared. I went to cities I had dreamed about, met new people, and learned how thrilling it was to navigate the world on my own terms. Each trip strengthened my confidence, reminding me that I didn't need anyone else to validate my existence. Even socially, I noticed a change. Friends who had distanced themselves began to reach out, curious about the woman who was thriving. People I barely knew started asking for advice about work, investments, and personal growth. And I realized something. My success had a quiet, undeniable power. It wasn't about revenge or making him jealous. It was about becoming someone who could never be shaken by another person's choices. Yet, the most powerful moment came quietly one evening. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing my bank statements, and it hit me like a revelation. I don't need him. I haven't needed him for months. And I'm stronger, smarter, and wealthier than I ever was with him. The anger that had burned for weeks after the breakup had faded, replaced by something infinitely more satisfying: peace and self-respect. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, and with every financial milestone, every new client, every investment, and every small victory, I was building a life that no one could take away. I had turned heartbreak into strategy, betrayal into fuel, and pain into power. By reclaiming my financial independence, I realized that true revenge doesn't need to hurt anyone else. True revenge is proving to yourself that you can live your best life, no matter who abandoned you. I had found that secret, and it was intoxicating. And this was only the beginning. My wealth and independence were about to unlock a level of freedom I had never imagined. By the time a year had passed since he left, I hardly recognized myself. Not just in the way I looked, though my physical transformation was noticeable, but in the way I moved through the world. I carried myself differently now. There was a calm confidence in my posture, a spark in my eyes, and a sense of control that hadn't existed before. People started to notice it too. Friends, colleagues, even strangers seemed drawn to the energy I radiated. I had started working out regularly, not because I wanted him to see me differently, but because I wanted to feel powerful in my own body. I felt every muscle grow stronger, every stride I took a declaration of independence. I changed my style, not dramatically, but intentionally. I wore clothes that made me feel confident, polished, and unapologetically myself. Every small decision was a step toward reclaiming the identity I had lost during my marriage. I also cultivated my social life in ways I had never imagined. I traveled for work, for pleasure, and sometimes just because I could. Solo trips to new cities, weekend getaways with friends, and dinners with inspiring people became the new normal. I surrounded myself with those who uplifted me, who reminded me of my value, and who encouraged my growth. I realized that the people we choose to keep in our lives shape who we become. And I was finally choosing wisely one evening. While sipping wine at a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline, I caught my reflection in a glass window. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable, not because she was different physically, but because she radiated something I hadn't seen in years: self-respect, independence, and a quiet, undeniable power. I smiled at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I had become. Even my professional life was thriving. My freelance business had grown into a full-fledged consultancy with multiple clients, contracts, and a reputation for excellence. I had started mentoring other women, sharing the lessons I had learned about independence, self-confidence, and financial literacy. I had gone from being dependent on someone else's income to being a creator of value in the world, and it felt exhilarating. But perhaps the most striking transformation wasn't visible on the outside at all. It was internal. I no longer thought about him constantly. His presence in my mind had diminished to a shadow that barely touched me. I didn't obsess over his social media posts or replay conversations in my head. I had stopped letting the past dictate my emotions. Instead, I focused on myself, my dreams, and the future I was building. I began noticing subtle, almost surreal changes in how people responded to me. Men who had once dismissed me now approached me with respect, but I didn't care. Women admired my independence, my confidence, and my drive. Colleagues treated me as a leader. And while I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, I realized that the life I was building was a living testament to my resilience taught in quiet moments. I reflected on how far I had come. The woman I was when he left broken, insecure, and unsure had been transformed by heartbreak into someone unstoppable. My life was no longer dictated by fear or dependency. I had discovered that strength comes from within, that freedom is earned through discipline and self-respect, and that happiness is cultivated, not given. I also realized something profound. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be loud or vindictive. True revenge is the life you build for yourself, the wealth, confidence, and freedom that prove you are uncheckable, unbreakable, and entirely enough on your own. And in that moment, with the city lights glittering below me and the wind brushing against my face, I felt it. My transformation was complete. I was no longer the woman who had waited, hoped, or clung. I was Emily Carter, the woman who had chosen herself, reclaimed her power, and built a life so extraordinary that no one could ever diminish it. And this was only the beginning. I never expected to see him again. After all, I had moved on, rebuilt my life, and intentionally distanced myself from the past. I didn't stalk him online, I didn't ask about him, and I certainly didn't need closure. But life has a strange way of bringing the past back at the most unexpected moments. It happened at a mutual friends party, a casual gathering in a loft downtown. I almost didn't go, but something inside me whispered that I should, that this was a chance to see just how far I had come. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was him. He was standing in the corner, talking to a small group, laughing in that familiar way that used to make my stomach flip. But this time it didn't. This time he was just there. He spotted me at the same moment. His eyes widened, and I caught the faintest flicker of surprise, or maybe it was regret. But I didn't approach him. I didn't feel the need to. Instead, I stayed with my friends, laughing, engaging, and enjoying the night on my own terms. The contrast was unmistakable. He was still the man I knew, the one who had made the choice to leave, but something had shifted. His confident smile seemed a little forced. The way he carried himself was no longer magnetic. It was almost like he was trying to fill a void. And then I noticed the subtle differences in our lives. His conversation revolved around his new relationship and the challenges he was facing at work. There was stress in his voice, tension in his posture, and the faint trace of uncertainty that comes from realizing life isn't as perfect as you imagined. Meanwhile, I was radiant, calm, composed, and effortlessly engaged. I talked about projects I was passionate about, investments I had started, and travels I had undertaken. People listened when I spoke. They smiled when I laughed. They respected my presence, my independence, and the quiet authority I had cultivated over the past year. And most importantly, I felt it. I felt the power of a life reclaimed, a life built on my terms, a life completely untouched by the choices of others. At one point, our paths crossed in the living room. He said my name, his voice faltering slightly, and I smiled politely. Not out of arrogance, not out of malice, but out of self-respect. I realized in that instant that I didn't need validation from him or anyone else to feel whole. My happiness, my success, and my freedom were mine alone. I noticed him glance around, probably comparing what I had become to what he had expected me to be. But the truth was, I was nothing like the woman he thought he left behind. I was stronger, wiser, wealthier, more independent. The pain of the past had forged me into someone he could never have imagined. And in that moment, the silent satisfaction was overwhelming. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of the life he had abandoned. I didn't need to. My life itself was proof of everything he had missed out on. And that, I realized, was the purest form of revenge. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about thriving in a way he could never touch. As the evening went on, I danced, laughed, and shared stories with friends. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the party, not for the attention, but for the journey I had taken to get here. If he hadn't left, I might never have discovered this version of myself, this power, this freedom. The contrast between us was undeniable, but it wasn't for anyone else to see. It was for me. When I left the party that night, I walked home alone under the city lights, with the wind on my face and a sense of profound clarity. I was no longer the woman defined by someone else's choices. I was Emily Carter, the woman who had turned heartbreak into opportunity, betrayal into strategy, and abandonment into the life she had always deserved. And in that moment, I knew that I had won, not with words, not with revenge, but with the unstoppable force of a life fully lived on my own terms. The day I realized I had truly won didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden epiphany. It came quietly, in the kind of ordinary moment that makes you realize how far you've traveled without even noticing it. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment, sunlight streaming through the window, a cup of coffee in my hand, reviewing my latest projects and investments. The numbers in my bank account reflected more than money. They reflected months of discipline, courage, and persistence. I thought back to the night he left. The hollow ache in my chest, the silence of the house, the humiliation of seeing him move on so effortlessly. For years, I had wondered if I would ever feel whole again, if I would ever trust myself, if I would ever believe that my life could be worth something without him. And now I realized something profound. I didn't just feel whole, I felt alive. powerful, and completely free. Freedom. That was the word that kept echoing in my mind. Not freedom from him or from pain, but freedom from dependency, fear, and doubt. I could go anywhere, do anything, and be anyone I wanted to be. I could travel, start new projects, build wealth, and create relationships, all without ever seeking validation from anyone else. And I could smile without guilt, laugh without hesitation, and live fully without regret. I thought about him, of course, not with anger or bitterness, but with the quiet acknowledgement of what his departure had sparked in me. If he had never left, I might never have discovered this version of myself, the woman who is confident, self-sufficient, and unstoppable. Losing him had felt like the end of the world at the time, but it had been the catalyst for my greatest transformation. I realized that sometimes the people who abandon us unintentionally give us the chance to find our own power. Also thought about the concept of revenge. I had once imagined it as confrontation, humiliation, or proving someone wrong. But real revenge, I learned, doesn't involve anyone else. Real revenge is building a life so full, so extraordinary, and so authentic that it becomes the proof of your resilience. It's about thriving in ways the person who left could never imagine. And it's about never allowing bitterness to define you. My friends, my colleagues, and even strangers notice the change. People often ask me how I had done it, how I had turned heartbreak into success, betrayal into growth. And the truth was simple. I focused on myself, I invested in myself, and I refused to let anyone else's choices dictate my happiness. I stopped waiting for permission, I stopped chasing approval, and I started living deliberately. Every small decision added up, every calculated risk paid off, and every moment of self-doubt became fuel for growth. I had wealth, yes. I had freedom, yes. But more importantly, I had peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing that you are enough, that your life is yours, and that no one else's actions can take that away. I no longer needed him to validate me. I no longer needed him to confirm my worth. I didn't even need the satisfaction of seeing him regret his choices. I had surpassed all of that, and so I sat there in my sunlit apartment, sipping my coffee, feeling the warmth on my face and the pulse of life around me. I was Emily Carter, a woman who had been abandoned, who had been hurt, and who had been underestimated. And yet, here I was wealthy, independent, confident, and completely free. I had taken heartbreak and turned it into a foundation for greatness. I had taken betrayal and transformed it into strength. Losing him had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to face myself, to reclaim my power, and to discover a life that was far richer than I had ever imagined. And in that discovery, I found the ultimate truth. I didn't need him to complete me. I only needed me. And that, I realized with a deep, satisfying calm, was the ultimate victory.